December 8th. We are interviewing George Albert Denholm in RFA Library. This is Dan DeBruin and Claudio DeMarco.
Ago, he was, patriotism, I guess.
Fired up. Alright, yeah, there's some questions in here about Pearl Harbor. It's only this many questions. It's not too bad. Alright. Alright, start out. What is your full name?
George Albert Finley Denholm.
Alright. When and where were you born?
I was born in Scotland, near Johnston, Scotland, near Glasgow, in 1926, March the 31st.
Alright. How did you end up in the U.S.?
Well, my father came here, and all his brothers were here, and so we settled in Ohio, near Akron.
Are you a dual citizen, or are you?
No, I'm not. I gave up British citizenship.
Alright. What kind of education did you have prior to entering the service?
Well, I went in from high school, and I had completed my junior year, so that was it. I went in the summer, in August of 1943, I think it was.
Alright. How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
Let's see. We were off ice skating in an ice skating rink, and when we were coming home on the bus, we heard about it. They had an extra newspaper edition out, extra. That sort of thing.
What did you think when you heard that? What went through your mind as you were?
Well, I was with a friend, and we said, well, we should be able to take care of this in about 3 months.
Alright, so when you enlisted, correct?
Yeah.
Alright, when did you enlist relative to Pearl Harbor?
Well, we had to get our parents' permission unless we were 18 to enlist. And so my birthday was March 31st in that year, and I started talking to my parents. And finally, they allowed me to go in August, and so that's when I signed up. I was 17. My brother, who was 3 years older than I, was in the Air Force, the Army Air Force, and so he was well into things. Actually, I was kind of late, I was kind of young, and so I didn't see a lot of action, and compared to other people who got in a little earlier than I did.
Alright. Why did you enlist, and why did you choose the Navy?
I don't know, I didn't want the Army. And so I just went into the Navy, and I guess I enlisted because, it was a patriotic duty. It's like when Japan made that attack on our country. It was, comparable as that the bombing of the Twin Towers in New York. However, the difference there was that we knew who did it. We had a country to declare war against, and that's what we did. And we all felt that it was our duty to go in. Whereas with the Twin Towers, you don't know who did it, actually. You don't have a country. You have a bunch of renegades. And so it makes it much more difficult for today than it was then. And of course, everybody was patriotic. The women started working in plants and started men's jobs like welding and that sort of thing. And, we had rationing of gasoline and tires and even shoes. So everybody kicked in. We had scrap drives and so forth,
What was your family's reaction to you and your brother entering the service?
Well, my mother just shook her head, 17 years old going off to war and everything, but of course my brother didn't go in until he was 18, and I can't remember if he was drafted. No, he couldn't have been drafted. He went into the Air Corps, and during the war, he was over in Italy and did bombing missions over Germany from Italy.
Oh, wow. All right. Where did you go for your training after you enlisted?
For training, Great Lakes in Illinois, just north of Chicago.
What was your training like?
Cold. We were there. They would open the barracks windows, right? And it was 5 below zero every morning. But it was pretty good, actually. They covered a lot of the stuff in a short period of time. And that was a time when you had to decide for yourself where, what branch, what group you wanted to go into, what training you got, and so forth. And I was gung-ho. I wanted to go into be a rangefinder for the guns on the big ships and so forth. Well, they tested my eyes, and they were too close together to fit their instruments. Now, their instruments didn't fit you; you fit them, right? And so I was not able to go to rangefinder school. And then I tried to go in as a quartermaster, the guy who steered the big ships. And my math wasn't that good. And so I thought, well, you know, the submarines are sinking half of the Japanese Navy or more, so I'll go into sub duty. But then they said, no, you're not 21. We're not taking people in until they're 21. It wasn't fair. So I hung around and stood in line, and they said, okay, you guys go to gunnery school, and you'll be with the merchant marines on those convoys on the North Atlantic. Well, the cutoff was right in front of me, so I didn't go to the Atlantic. I went to the Pacific. It's a good thing too, because those guys are getting shot. Those guys are getting shot down left and right. Those guys on those convoys, they were getting dunked in the icy Atlantic. There was a lot of deaths in that group.
Do you feel that your training accurately prepared you for the job that you needed to do?
Oh yeah, sure.
What was your normal day? What was a normal day in basic training?
Well, it depends on where I was. You know, it was quite different going to service schools in the States. You know, you had like a regular day. You would go and take lessons and so forth and learn certain skills. And then overseas, it was altogether different what you did each day, depending on your assignments.
What kind of any experiences that stick out in your mind? Any stories or events that happened or particularly memorable from your
You
training?
mean overseas or just generally?
From the training portion of your service.
Oh, the training portion. No, not particularly. I do remember that we went out into the lake. What is it? Lake Michigan, and practiced rowing just as if we were back in the old sailing days, you know. And I thought, why are we doing this? But we had good liberties in Milwaukee. We take the elevated train. It was an extension of the elevated train from Chicago, and we go up to Milwaukee, and they had we'd dance up there and have a good liberty. And then we went cross country. Then when we finished our training in Great Lakes, we got a 9-day leave, I think it was, and then we went to the Pacific. But we went to California for further training, and that's when I got into small boats. I was assigned to a landing craft fleet in California, and that was altogether different. We were at Morro Bay, California, and we trained the Army there in landings on the surf. through the surf. So.
So what was a normal day of training when you were in California?
Well, if we took the Army out, they'd pack a lunch for us, and we'd go out on the small boats, and all these Army guys we'd pack them into our boats, and these were these Jeep lighters. That's where we trained. They were like 36 feet long with the ramp that comes down and goes onto the beach. You've probably seen pictures of them, you know, the ramp goes down on the beach and the soldiers go off firing and all that. Well, we trained them on the coast of California, which was a pretty rough surf there, and we would go in through the surf, lower the ramp, and these guys would go onto the beach. And that was the training there. And that was an all-day session when we did that. Otherwise, we would what would we do? We would most of the time we were on the boats in one way or the other, because we were training ourselves at that time. And it's quite a trick to take one of those boats in through a surf, land on a beach, put your ramp down, bring it back up, and then back out of the surf. It's pretty tricky, and you have to know what you're doing a little bit. Yeah. So I was in the small Jeep lighter, what they call Jeep lighters, the 36-footers, and then I was also in the 50-foot LCMs, which handled tanks. And so that was we were training essentially for hitting the beaches, for invasion of islands in the Pacific. That's what we were doing.
Where did you go from your basic training? And where did you go from California?
From California, well, we went up to San Francisco. Well, from San Diego, we went to Morro Bay. From Morro Bay, we went to San Francisco, stayed a few days there, and then up to Seattle, Washington. We thought we were going to stay at Bremerton Island up there, which is a Navy base, but instead they just put us on the USS Massachusetts as passengers. We shipped over to Pearl Harbor then.
So you were in Pearl Harbor then after the bombing?
Yeah, quite a time after the bombing. I was in Pearl Harbor. Let's see if I got the date on this. I was in Pearl Harbor in July and early August of 1944.
Was it pretty much repaired and rebuilt at that point?
Yeah, things were working. I mean, it was a real busy island, and they were, getting ships ready to go on invasions and that sort of thing. And it was pretty well cleared up by then. Of course, the battleships were still lying in the water. They were disabled, and nobody had gotten them out yet. Of course, there's one of them still not out. But then we shipped from. We ready to go?
Oh yeah.
All right. We shipped from in August of 1944. We shipped over into the Pacific, and we went south, and we crossed the equator, going south. We crossed the equator in August the 12th, 1944. We got hazed pretty well. They do things like they threw me in a coffin with chicken guts in it and closed the lid, all that. But we did get a certificate for all that there, and you can see that was on the USS Jason. We went on there. So we crossed the equator right at the international date line, which is west of Hawaiian Islands. then we went through the Solomon Islands, and we stopped at Guadalcanal for a little while. And then we went to the Admiralty Islands, where I was stationed for, let's see, I was stationed from August of 44 to April of 45 there. And the Admiralties had been secured when I got there. The Admiralty Islands was a group of coral islands with a reef around them. Quite a big place, and it was held by the Japanese. And our job there was to service the 3rd Fleets and the 7th Fleets, take ammunition to them and supplies and men and so forth. And the Admiralties were secured when we got there, but there was still fighting going on in the mountains. It was a jungle island and quite big. And there was malaria there and snakes and all that, jungle stuff. And I remember we particularly had to be careful about when we went to bed. We had to turn the blankets back and make sure there weren't any snakes in our bed, because they love to get in and they crawl up into warm, dark places. Same way with when we got out of bed, we'd have to check our boots to make sure no snakes had crawled in. They had a black snake that would kill you in a short time, and they had coral snakes, and if you were bit, you were dead in 5 minutes with the coral snakes, and we had to look out for them. But in those islands, the harbor itself was absolutely beautiful. It was a great harbor for shipping, and they had a dry dock in there that would handle battleships. And by then I was on LCMs, on the bigger boats, and we used to use those as like tugs. I mean, they were so powerful. They had 2 twin gray marine engines in them, and we used to push, like the Indianapolis, we pushed into the dry dock there.
Wow.
Things like that. But when I was in the Admiralties, we always used to have to, at night after 5 o'clock or so, we'd have to button our shirts, button the sleeves, take our Adabrin. We used to have to take medication so that we wouldn't get malaria. We all looked Chinese. It turned our skin yellow. So I said, I'm getting out of here if I can. So we went to this, we volunteered to go on to this little island, which was just off of the Manius, and it was a radio single receiving island, and they used to sit out there in the bay, and when the Japanese up in the hills would get on the radio, they'd lock in the signal and get a direction. And then they had another little island way off, and they would triangulate. They would get a direction, triangulate. Then they would send Army unit up to try and find those guys. Well, they didn't have much luck, and because those guys, I mean, they were used to the jungle. I think they lived on rats and insects and snakes and things like that, And Japanese were, they didn't want to surrender. I mean, to lose honor that would have been a loss of honor, and part of their code was that, they would rather die than surrender. Well, it worked for some of them. Others surrendered, But if any Japanese wanted to surrender on the Admiralty Islands, he would come down and stand in our chow line. So he figured if he didn't get caught, he'd get a free meal, right? But so that was the Admiralty Islands, and then we went to the Philippine Islands. We left the Admiralties. Let me see here. we left the Admiralties in April of 1945 and went to the Philippines. And we went into Manila, and at that time MacArthur was battling in the city itself of Manila, and in the Manila Hotel they were fighting floor to floor just to gain control of that big hotel there, which he used as a base. And so the Manila had been secured by MacArthur. MacArthur always wanted to look good, so he secured Manila pretty early. The first day we went into Manila, one of our guys stepped on a landmine, got killed, and it was always like that. We set up a tent area in Manila, and every morning the Japanese would sneak in and lay landmines all around the tent. So when we stepped out of our tent in the morning, we had to be extremely careful. So it was not a secured place, and there was a lot of that going on. But eventually we decided, well, we'll get out of that landmine area and go sleep on our boats. So we had a cabin built on this big 50-footer with cots in and everything, pretty comfortable. And so we would just anchor off in the harbor and sleep overnight there. Now that didn't make us completely safe, but we thought it was better than dodging landmines all the time. So our job in Manila was the same, more or less. We serviced the 3rd Fleet and the 7th Fleet, and whoever else came along, there were Australian ships and so forth, and we would take provisions out to them. It was mostly ship-to-shore things, and that was our main job there. But our food was so bad, I ate rice for 2 weeks in a row, and again we said, well, we got to get out of here. So we heard that over in Cavite, which is across the Manila Harbor, and it was a naval air station called Singli Point, and they needed some people over there for small boat duty, and so we volunteered to go over there. And we had heard that, well, they're bringing in food from Australia over there, so true enough, we got some good meals over there. And my favorite was an Australian cheese butter that it was tasted out of this world. You know, you can't believe how little things like that make so much difference when you're over there. You know, a lot of people wanted ice cream. I wanted toast and butter. But anyhow, I spent then probably the rest of the time, well, I was in Cavite for some time, and then we went back to Manila, and we went home. Here we left Manila January 12th in 1946. On we were passengers on the USS San Jacinto, which was a converted it was an aircraft carrier converted from a big cruiser, and we arrived back. Well, we went under the Golden Gate Bridge on Groundhog Day, which was February 2nd of 1945. Is that right? Yeah, we left Manila, 46. So we went under the Golden Gate Bridge on February 2nd of 1946. And we hung around for a while, and then I got discharged. And I think my discharge came in April of 46. And so I'd done short of 3 years in the service.
What, for clarification, what does LCM stand for?
Oh, landing craft mechanized, and they carried tanks. LCVP was that was a 50-foot, the mechanized, and the LCVP was a landing craft that carried jeeps and personnel mostly. And those, all those vessels were used for different things. The LCM was particularly useful. I told you they used us as tugs. We also were used as minesweepers, and how was it? We cleared harbors. We pulled fishing nets out and things like that, so that the bigger airplanes could land. Those seaplanes, we had Coronados and Catalinas, and they were both big planes and used by the Navy. And they took a long space to take off until they came out with takeoff assist rockets. Then they would have a rocket hooked to them and give them extra speed and get them up off the water. But we also used those LCMs. Well, I'll tell you about a little experience we had. We used 3 LCMs, and each LCM had a crew of 3. And we would get gasoline for Singli the Singli Air Base at Cavite. We'd get high octane fuel from ships that would come into the harbor, and then we had a great big Australian barge. I don't know how big it was. It was monstrous. And we would tow that out to a ship. They'd fill up this barge with high octane fuel, like 100 octane or more. And then we'd take it in and they'd pump it out and use it for their airplanes. Well, this one time we had three LCMs handling that Australian barge. We pulled up alongside the ship. They filled the barge, and so it was really heavy. It was low in the water. And a storm came up. I mean a big one. And it came up fast. And these guys, they just, rather than have we got high octane fuel in there, right? Rather than have this barge bang up against the side of the ship, they just cast us off. And this thing's floating free through all sorts of ships that were moored in the harbor, right? And so we then had the job of hooking onto this thing with our 3 LCMs and towing it out of there. Well, these waves were coming. We had to land 2 men on the barge to get the the ship gave us towing lines, which were cable. Metal cable with rope eyes, and we had to get the eyes over the cleats and on the barge, so we dropped 2 guys off, and it was like the wave would come in, the barge was down here and your boat would be up here, so we had to time things, when you jump off and that sort of thing. And so we kept fighting that, and finally we got hold of it, and we got 1 LCM hooked up. Well, we had to pull it against the wind, and these LCMs have big ramps, and it's like a sail. So we're going against the wind with this big sail up, And this barge is sitting in the water, doesn't want to do anything or go anyplace. And so we're just going back and forth like this, So we then had to lash our other 2 boats alongside, and 3 of us pull this barge, and we were avoiding this ship, we were avoiding that ship. Here's a hospital ship, we're avoiding that.
Oh, wow.
We were supposed to get a commendation for that, but it never worked, and we had to beat our way back through the storm, back to Cavite, and just to handle that, handle that boat. That's one of our experiences.
And what unit were you with during this time?
Say again.
What unit were you with during
Oh, that
this
was
time?
Boat Pool 15-1, U.S. Navy.
Alright, were you ever under fire?
Not particularly. When we were in Manila, the Japanese had sunk ships in the harbor to block the Navy from doing anything, and those ships were just scuttled, and they were lying on the bottom. And here's a chart of Manila Harbor, and you can see all these red dots.
Oh wow.
They're wrecks. They're Japanese ships that have been sunk in order to prevent us from getting into the harbor. See here, right there's the entrance, and prevent us from doing anything. This is the Pasig River up here, and this is
They're all along there.
yeah, they sunk everything along the Pasig River. Now, they were diving, our men were diving, clearing those out in diving suits, you know. And if we came up the river too fast, we were causing a wake,
Yeah.
they'd shoot us. So we had to be careful. But out in here, I got shot at once out here by a Japanese guy. They left Japanese personnel on board with rifles, and they would snipe at anything they could snipe at. And the Navy gave us carbines to use against these guys, but one Japanese shot at me here, and we had metal boats, so it went off the metal protection for the coxswain, and I just goosed the engines and got out of there. I'm not shooting back at them, right? Eventually, the Navy took our rifles away because we were more of a menace to ourselves than to the Japanese, right? So, but they cleared those guys out. Well, many of them hanged themselves, and they hanged themselves from the gun turrets there, and they just lay there and bake in the sun. They all looked brown and shriveled up, you know. And finally, the Army got and cleaned that all out. But these guys were there to do whatever damage they could, and they were just left there. They probably volunteered for the glory of the emperor, you know, and knowing they were going to die. But that's the way they thought.
I've asked you about your day-to-day duties and the food. You talked about was the food better when you went back to Manila the second time?
Yeah, it was.
Had it improved?
Food was always a problem. we used to get baked rolls and bread, and at first you'd break them open and you'd pick out the cockroaches that were baked in there with the flour, right? After a while, you didn't care. You just ate.
What were your officers like?
Pretty good. Actually, well, in California, we had the boat pool, the outfit I joined in California before we came overseas was had been up at Kiska and Attu in Alaska, you know, for that supposed battle up there, which never occurred. But they came back down. I joined them. They were boat pool 15, and then when we joined them, it was boat pool 15-1, and they. What was I going to say? What was your question again? I can't remember one.
What your officers were like?
Oh, we had a Navy officer there, and he was friends with Ronnie Reagan, and Ronnie would come down, and his name was Wallenstein. We used to call him Wally Goo, old man Wally Goo. And I remember he was walking along with Ronnie Reagan, and we saluted him smartly, you know. And he says to Ronnie, he says, "Those are my men." We had two outfits there at that same base. He says, "Those are my men." Our chief executive officer in Manila found himself a woman, and we never saw him. We never saw the guy. He was somewhere with his woman. But they said our executive officer, he says the story out was, well, he's so smart, he can measure the cubic feet of Pasig River flowing all the time, but he doesn't know anything about how to manage a group. So our top officers were not as good as the in-between officers, and of course the in-between officers did all the work, so it worked.
Alright, your packet mentioned that you did some minesweeping and salvage operations. What does minesweeping involve?
Well, we would take two of our LCMs and stretch a cable, a wire cable between us. And we'd try to make that cable as long as we could, naturally. And the idea was to go along, drag that cable, and you were supposed to, get this, cut the cable where when they put mines down, they had a weight down if it weren't too deep. They had a weight down and then a cable measured to where a ship would hit the mine, it was measured right. And so you were supposed to go along and cut that cable. Well, what would happen would be that it would just drag the mine. If they ever were cut, they would supposedly pop to the surface, and there was a rifleman on board who would shoot at this mine until he hit the right place and blow it up. Well, we never did find a mine, fortunately, because I didn't like their engineering. To start with, if these things blow up underwater, they might get us, right? Number two, if they come up, they still might get us. So. Luckily, we didn't find any mines ourselves, but that's what was done. Now, we had a guy, when we were in Cavite, we had, I told you, we had these big Coronados and they would moor those. Those were seaplanes, and they would moor them in the bay there at Cavite. Well, we had a guy who was in our outfit, but he was stationed in Manila. He got drunk, shot up a house of prostitution, stole a boat from Manila, drove it all the way to Cavite, and it was a personnel boat, which was a snub-nosed thing, He drove that thing right into a Coronado airplane. And the Coronado went to the bottom, and next day or two we were ordered to again with the wire cables drag it up and out. Well, you know what happened. The wire cable just went through the airplane. So we weren't dragging it any place. So I don't know what they did with that eventually. But that was one of the things we did. These LCMs, they were versatile machines. You could come up to a ship and then put one engine in reverse, one engine forward, and crank the wheel, and just walk that thing sideways up against the side of the ship.
Oh, wow. So minesweeping wasn't horribly effective.
No, we didn't do it for very long.
No.
Thank goodness someone finally caught on. It wasn't working.
Alright, and aside from the seaplane, what other kinds of things did you salvage? Was dragging a cable the standard procedure for that?
Yeah, I guess so with us. We were in a salvage boat. They had they had salvage vessels there.
Alright.
And I'll tell you, are we running out of time or anything?
We've got as much time as you want.
Okay.
Just every hour, if we run out of an hour, we need to change the tape.
Okay, but I'll tell you one little salvage operation that went on that we kind of got into. When the Japanese invaded Manila, the bank, one of the banks there, got all these silver pesos, which were worth, at the time we went in, well, at that time they were worth $1. But they got all these silver pesos and put them in bags, put them on a barge, took the barge out into the harbor and sank it. So all this money was laying down below. So they put in after the war, after the Japanese were out of there, we knew what the location of that was, and so they sent divers down to get these silver pesos. And we used to go over there and we'd have lunch with those guys, and they'd say, well, take a few pesos there and for souvenirs, and so we did. We got them out of the scuppers. They were laying all over the boat. Got them out of the scuppers, and strangely enough, they had all barnacles on them and everything, right? So I picked up maybe 5 or 6 of them for souvenirs. And they were later stolen from me, so I can't show you those. This, might as well do this, huh? Oh, here's let's see, where was this? Was this Manila, or I can't remember where I got this. It was either in Manila, and I can't remember, but it was either in Manila Harbor or the, yeah, it had to be in Manila. This came off a Japanese hospital ship, and they were using that hospital ship to transport troops, which was against the Geneva Convention. And so they commandeered it and took it in, and we went out for some reason, and original inspection, we took out some officers, and this was in one of the cabins, and the officer said, yeah, go ahead, take it. It's, I think, what they told me was that this is a family inscription of some sort. So the Japanese person who was there had this in his room, and that was one of my souvenirs. Another souvenir that I didn't bring is I have a Japanese dress saber. It's got gold filigree in it and things like that. Well, my son, I gave it to my son. He collects these things. He works for the security agent, the American Security Agency in Maryland. And he collects all sorts of things, German things, and American, and Japanese and everything. So I gave him the saber. I don't have that. I don't have many things here to offer. I just want to show you what a Christmas card looked like that's from the Philippines. Christmas card. These bills are absolutely worthless. They were put out by the Japanese as occupation money, and they were laying all over the streets. I mean, and when we first went into Manila, before we went into, we were stationed in this area here, and had a campground here, and we were kind of circling around in our boats and all the rest of it, and these guys were peddling, these Filipinos were paddling out to us, and they had all sorts of this stuff. And they were saying, can we buy a saw? Can we buy a hammer? Can we buy whatever? And these guys were collecting this money from them and giving them old hammers and whatever they had, that were really valuable. So, but it was really worthless. I guess that's about it, guys.
Let's see.
I should tell you probably that I saw the Mount Hood blow
Yeah.
up. The Mount Hood was an ammunition ship. That was in the Manius Island. See, Manius Island was the main island of the British. I'm trying to find Manus on here. It was off Australia. Oh, here. They don't mark Manus, they mark Admiralty Islands. So that was the group of islands. It was just north of New Guinea. Okay. And the Mount Hood had come into the harbor there, and it was an ammunition ship. And of course their job was to distribute ammunition to other ships. It had a mooring in the harbor, and there was, that morning, a Japanese airplane had flown over the harbor. They did that all the time from Truk Island. Truk was a Japanese fortress that we bypassed, and they had an airfield on there. Well, we'd bomb it all the time, but they put parts together, and they'd always send an airplane over to visit us, right? And we'd be watching, we finally got movies in, we'd be watching a movie, and then they'd have to turn the movie off about 8 o'clock at night, because here comes a Japanese Betsy over us, and they'd go over to the airfield and lay a bomb down. That was their nightly ritual, right? But a Japanese plane had flown over the harbor that morning, and we don't know what happened to the Mount Hood, but there was a fire reported from the Mount Hood. Now, Mount Hood was moored in there, and there were other moorings all around it. So when it blew up, it took at least 3 other ships with us. They never told us how many people were killed, but it had to be somewhere around 2,000. Now, when we were at the time of the explosion, we were at a dock on shore, and we heard the explosion, turned around, saw it all, and then metal started dropping in the water all around us. Now we were I think at least 2 miles away from the explosion, right? And this big blast hit us. Well, we said, well, we better cast off this dock, because here comes a wave. And it's true, we got out a ways, and this big wave comes in, and any boat that was at the dock was just thrown on the shore. And so we were out there, and we were looking for survivors, but we didn't find anybody. And so that was one of the hard stories of the war. And the funny part was that the strange thing was that Tokyo Rose came on that night and said, "Well, how'd you like your explosion today?" So there might have been more Japanese involvement. It could have been either an accident, or a result of a fire, or it could have been the Japanese. We don't know, but that was one of the bad stories. Now, just about 3 years ago, I went to Hawaii on vacation, and we went to the Arizona. And if you guys get a chance, you should go there, and see that. If you ever get into Hawaii, or to Oahu, go see the Arizona. It's actually a grave. The people who died in the Arizona are still down there. That's their grave, and it's a shrine actually, and it kind of brought a tear to my eye, but it's shows you, it just brought home to me that you know, here we were in a war and these guys died. It could have been us, you know, but they died for a good reason, and it's true. We should never forget that. End of lecture.
Alright. Who do you remember best from your time in the service? And what kind of impression did they leave on you?
You mean friends that?
Yeah, just people who you knew. You really remember well.
Yeah, I had some friends from Michigan and everything, and we kept. One guy was from Arkansas, believe it or not, and we kept in touch for a while. And but you know, we just went by the books, just kind of over time. It's been a long time. So yeah, we used to take, you know, things like taking liberty together. I went on a rest leave up at the northern part of the Philippines, a place called Baguio, and all my friends were up there too, and we had a great time up there.
We're gonna have to take pictures of that.
Oh,
Okay. But were you awarded any medals or commendations?
You know, my service ribbons I've lost along the way somehow. I had about 5 of them, and I'm not sure I could tell you what they are now, but one was for the Battle of the South Pacific, one was the Philippine Liberation ribbon. One was a victory, what they call a victory ribbon. I can't remember the names of them all, but I don't have them anymore.
What did you do after the war when you left the Navy? Where did you go from there?
Well, you know, the service paid for our college education. I went to Kent State University in Ohio. Took journalism and spent most of my life after that in journalism and advertising, sales promotion, that sort of thing. I actually retired from working when I was about 43. Went into real estate and played stock market, and that's my history.
I'm kind of a side topic. Any feelings on the events at Kent State during the...
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, once in a while I used to get solicitations for money from Kent State, and I thought, no, those guys just didn't handle it right. The university presidents and everything, they should not have allowed the National Guard to come in there at all. So I call them Murder Incorporated now. I have bad feelings about my old university.
Well, then that's about it for the interview, Bart.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, great. I hope I did something worthwhile here.
Yeah.